I wish I could say that I was talking to you today from Adelaide at the 68th International Astronautical Congress. But alas, with university and living expenses being what they are, I was not a witness to the history that has just been written. On September 24, during the first day at the IAC, it was announced by Senator Simon Birmingham that the Turnbull government would establish an Australian space agency.
While there is more work to be done in this review, from the extensive consultation process to date, one point is overwhelmingly clear. The case for establishing an Australian space agency is compelling. And so I am pleased today to announce that the Australian government will be establishing a national Australian space agency.
At the present time, it is not clear what Australia's space program will entail. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull only spoke briefly about the program and didn't elaborate on it.
Well, it's being announced today. It's a small agency. It's designed to coordinate and lead. But the space sector, of course, is one of enormous potential. We already have many Australian companies participating in it, and it is an example of, it's part of our innovation economy, our innovation and science economy.
Interestingly, former astronaut and Director of Crew and Mission Operations for Boeing's commercial space program, Chris Ferguson, voiced enthusiasm for launching future Australian astronauts, suggesting that the program might be reaching out to the private sector.
We're looking forward to taking an Australian astronaut into space someday.
The Turnbull government is expected to unveil the long-term plans over the week of the IAC. Interestingly, the opposition led by Bill Shorten are also going to unveil their own plans for the space program. While I would have much rather Australia's first space program to be a 100% private enterprise, and while we still need to wait for more information to be unveiled, I firmly believe that with the right people in charge, Australia could become the new leader in space exploration. Few people realise this, but Australia launched its first satellite back in 1967, the Weapons Research Establishment satellite. Since then, Australia has relied on NASA, ESA, and various other space agencies to launch its own satellites. In fact, Australia has been established as a NASA outpost as far as space exploration is concerned. NASA has several of its own facilities in Australia, such as the Canberra Deep Space Communications Complex. They also contract various CSIRO facilities, like the Parkes Observatory. Australia has had 3 astronauts, and they all had to go through NASA and become American citizens. Phil Chapman never made it to space. Paul Scully Power flew only 1 shuttle mission. And Andy Thomas, my all-time favourite astronaut, flew 5 shuttle missions and spent 6 months on Russia's Mir station. There were proposals in the 1980s to establish Cape York in northern Queensland as a space launch facility. The key benefit of launching from Cape York is its very close proximity to the equator. The closer you are to the equator, the faster the rotation of the Earth. Faster rotation means more momentum. More momentum means less fuel needed to lift off the ground. Less fuel means less money to spend. Such a launch site would allow easy access to a perfectly equatorial orbit, allowing manned spacecraft and space stations to completely avoid the South Atlantic anomaly, thus minimizing radiation exposure. Unfortunately, these proposals were not supported by the Australian government and were abandoned. Thanks a lot, John Howard. In more recent times, teams of scientists and students at the universities of New South Wales, Sydney, Adelaide and South Australia have been building a series of nanosatellites, which has helped reignite government interest in the space agency. I believe the time to establish Australia as a spacefaring nation is now. Ferguson has already voiced support of an Australian space program. Very possibly, we could see Australian astronauts flying the CST-100 Starliner. But that's not all. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk is in Australia to unveil his revised plans for manned Mars missions. Let's see if he rectifies the shortcomings of his proposed radiation shield this time. I believe with some adjustments, manned missions to the Moon and Mars could become easily accessible in the near future. The proposed launch vehicle for the interplanetary transport system could easily lift a radiation shelter surrounded by 2 meters of water, a Bigelow Aerospace BA-330 habitat module, and a Dragon spacecraft. Recently, the proposed Red Dragon mission was cancelled, and its Super Draco engines would now only be used for launch escape and not propulsive landings. However, on his Twitter account, Musk was adamant that his revised Mars mission plans would still land propulsively and without parachutes. He also hinted that the SpaceX launch facility was wide enough to house a 9-metre wide vehicle. Coincidentally, 9 metres is the width of the Apollo lunar module with its legs extended.
These ships that you guys are building over there.
That Dragon spacecraft, that was about the size of the thing that landed on the moon. It was pretty small.
I believe my initial proposal for the SpaceX Moon and Mars missions could still be done, with some minor adjustments. Since the Dragon will no longer be making propulsive landings with its Super Dracos, why not something similar to the Gemini lunar surface rescue vehicle? Essentially, you have your Dragon capsule, but in place of the trunk, you have an ascent stage, a descent stage, and possibly a braking stage to begin the fall from lunar or Martian orbit. A Gemini spacecraft is about 3.9 tons, or about 2/3 of the Dragon spacecraft. So I estimate that a Dragon equivalent to the Gemini lunar surface rescue vehicle would probably be a third heavier, or some 69 tons including propellant. Together with the BA-330 and shelter module, this would be 198 tons. A single ITS launch vehicle could carry the stack to Earth orbit. A second ITS launch vehicle in the Falcon Heavy configuration could lift an Earth departure stage with all the propellant needed. I believe it would be within Australia's best interest to have some SpaceX, Boeing, Blue Origin and Bigelow aerospace facilities built in Queensland and finally established Cape York as a launch facility. In the long run, I foresee Australia's future astronauts getting into space not through NASA, but through Australia's National Space Agency. But if Australia is to become a new leader in space exploration, our space agency needs 3 things: honesty, transparency, and determination. NASA has no doubt made some great advancements as far as unmanned deep space exploration is concerned. However, their manned space program is practically non-existent and directionless at this time. It has devolved into little more than a political tool. Let's go to the moon! No, cancelled. Too expensive. No, let's skip the moon. Let's head to Mars. No, let's go to an asteroid. And so forth. The Orion program and its launch vehicles have had so many delays and changes of plans that I honestly see no evidence that the US government even wants a manned space program. The only people I've seen with serious devotion to manned deep space exploration is in the private sector. For Australia to become a new leader in space exploration, its agency needs to take the approach of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, or ABC. The ABC receives funding from the Australian government, but it remains independent and aims to achieve accurate and fair journalism. Likewise, the Australian Space Agency should receive funding from our government, but it should not become the political football that NASA has become. The government will probably have various satellite programs that it wishes to pursue, but the agency's main goal needs to be solving the radiation hazard and establishing the human race as a multi-planetary species. We need people with the same commitment as Elon Musk in charge of Australia's space program, and we need people like Eugene Parker and John Malden solving the radiation problems on such missions. Australia needs its space agency to be more like SpaceX and less like NASA.